Welcome to Mother Earth News Audio. This is an audio article presentation by Bruce Ingram of his article. Please enjoy.
7 Foraging Finds. Wild edibles are particularly appealing because they're free for the gathering. To help you tap into that appeal, here are 7 widely distributed wild edibles that are as delicious as they are nutritious, plus recipes on how to prepare them. These foods are exceptionally high in vitamins and minerals, and their antioxidants can help ward off cancer and heart disease. Always, of course, when foraging for wild food, only harvest if you're 100% certain of your identification. While the following edibles are abundant, always keep sustainability in mind when foraging. The first one is watercress. A member of the mustard family, think kale, radishes, and turnips, and native to Europe and Asia, watercress grows in all continental U.S. states with the exception of North Dakota. In southwest Virginia, where we live, watercress thrives in our two springs. This perennial vegetable can commonly be found in vast colonies in cool, shallow streams floating on top or anchored in sediment. The 1/2 inch or so small round leaves are diagnostic, as are the dainty white flowers that appear in spring. We gather watercress year round, but we especially favor it in winter as a fresh vegetable and in spring when the pleasant peppery taste seems the most intense. Watercress is rich in vitamins A, C, and K and in antioxidants. Since we gather this vegetable from a spring, we don't consume it raw because of the risk of waterborne illnesses. Some folks grow watercress in greenhouses and sprinkle it raw on salads or serve it uncooked as a vegetable. Elaine stir fries watercress for egg and soup dishes, while I relish it in mashed potatoes with salt, pepper, and butter. Watercress is considered noxious and invasive in 46 states, so harvest freely in those areas and help protect the environment. The dandelion is next. The common dandelion is a much reviled weed to some, but to us, it's a valued wild perennial that's at its flavor peak from late winter through early summer. We especially like to gather them from under a layer of late fall and light snow where they augur the spring to come. When dandelions appear in our garden, we celebrate by gathering their fresh leaves. The yellow flower heads are also edible and quite tasty. The long edible taproot ensures that even aggressively harvesting the long toothed and deeply lobed leaves will result in the plant regenerating. The plant's hardiness helps explain how it can be found in all 50 states and in much of Canada as well. The greens are rich in vitamins A, C, E, and K, and they're also generously imbued with calcium and iron. Dandelions do dandy in spring salads and go well with morels and early season veggies such as spinach and broccoli. Don't harvest dandelions from anywhere that's been treated with chemicals. The third one is broadleaf plantain. Like dandelions, broadleaf plantain commonly appears in backyards. Native to Europe and Asia, this species thrives across most of North America and features large oval leaves that grow in a circular manner around the base. These leaves are best harvested when they're smaller and fresher since they become bitter with age. We generally prefer the leaves in spring because the heat also tends to make them less appealing come summer. Broadleaf plantain is a powerhouse plant possessing impressive amounts of vitamins A, C, and K, as well as being a supplier of potassium and zinc. As a bonus, it flaunts anti inflammatory properties as well. I don't care for the long spine shaped seed heads, but maybe I should, since they're rich in protein and omega 3 fatty acids. Enrich your soup and salads with the leaves, which can also be sauteed. The blackberry, and really this is my favorite. The blackberry is probably the most widespread wild summer fruit in America. The common blackberry thrives across the eastern 2/3 of the country. Two close relatives, the Pacific blackberry and the sawtooth blackberry, make sure, respectively, that folks on the West Coast and those from Texas to Florida and up the eastern seaboard can enjoy its tangy tartness too. Characterized by sharp thorns, large ebony berries up to 1/2 inch long, and 3 to 5 leaflets with pointed teeth. The blackberry ripens in midsummer throughout much of its range. Blackberries are extremely rich in vitamin C, and they also boast impressive amounts of vitamin K, fiber, and manganese. One of the sublime joys of summer for us is to pick a quart of berries in our backyard and a little over an hour later have Elaine turn them into a hot blackberry pie for dessert, perhaps with a dollop of vanilla ice cream on top. Blackberry also excels in cobblers, pancakes, muffins, waffles, jams, and clafoutis. And off topic just a little bit, Elaine just made a blackberry pie that I'm going to eat when I'm finished with this talk. The fifth one is blueberry. Two major species of blueberries flourish in North America. The lowbush blueberry thrives in the upper Midwest and in the Northeast down to North Carolina and Tennessee. The highbush species has a similar range, except it extends farther southward from East Texas and Oklahoma to Florida. The lowbush comes by its name honestly. On our land, they rarely top 2 feet in height, and they'll often form thick copses in the understory. Conversely, the high bush generally grows 6 to 12 feet tall, but it can reach 15 feet tall. Both sport simple, lance like leaves about 2 inches long. Both are also exceptionally nutritious since they're rich in vitamin C and K. Their flavonoids are known for their antioxidant capabilities, and this fruit also supports heart, bone, and skin health. The only drawback in gathering wild blueberries is that you'll be competing for them with many animals, from bears to turtles and many species of songbirds. But if you can find enough, blueberries can be turned into the usual assortment of sweet treats. A majority of the time, I only gather enough for toppings on cereal and oatmeal. Number 6 is the black walnut. One could make the case that the native black walnut is the healthiest wild nut in America. Ranging from East Texas to southern Nebraska, eastward to New England, and then south to northern Florida, this tall, majestic tree appears naturally in stream bottoms, along fence rows, at field edges, and in forest openings. It has also been planted in many backyards. The tree's alternating compound leaves can be up to 2 feet long and have around 20 narrow, toothed leaflets. In autumn, the slightly smaller than a baseball green husk, are diagnostic. They'll turn brown, then black when they're left to lie on the ground. To beat squirrels to the inner nut meat, I gather walnuts in late September and then use a hammer to remove the green husk. I spread the nuts on sheets of newspaper to dry for several weeks and then hull them. The nut meat is brimming with vitamin A, fiber, iron, and minerals. Add in the impressive amounts of polyunsaturated fats and antioxidants, and the ability to protect against heart disease and cancer. And really, what more could one ask from a nut? Oh, how about its ability to turn even the most mundane loaves of bread and batches of cookies into tasty sensations with its rich and nutty flavor? 7 is the oyster mushroom. I've heard mushroom enthusiasts call the oyster mushroom the healthiest of all wild fungi, and I can't disagree with that assessment. High in vitamins B and D, and known as a cancer fighter and an anti inflammatory, oyster mushrooms are also high in iron and can boost our immune systems. They can be quite variable in color, ranging from dark or grayish brown to tan or creamy white. Their size is also variable, extending to 7 inches across, but most of them are about 4 inches wide. The species earns its name since its fan-shaped appearance makes it look like its namesake seafood. Its margin, the edge of the mushroom cap, can be smooth or wavy, And it gives off a pleasant fishy or anise-like smell. Oyster mushrooms grow on dead or dying wood and are reputed to emerge throughout the year, but we've only found them in winters where we live. This species grows throughout much of North America. Oyster mushrooms go great as toppings for various meats and also in egg dishes, soups, and salads. As is true with almost all wild mushrooms, oysters should never be consumed raw. Elaine typically stir fries them before we eat them. Now that you know what to keep an eye out for next time you're outdoors, don't forget to try some of the recipes. Honest to goodness, she made a blackberry pie today from wild blackberries that we gathered last summer. And boy, that's one of the nice things about these gathering a lot when you do it. We can eat these throughout the year. And about the time we run out, it's time to start again.
The first recipe that I'm going to talk about is blackberry clafouti. Clafouti is a simple dessert that also goes well as a breakfast dish. As it bakes, the batter separates into layers of a dough bottom, a custardy middle, and berries on top. And our recipe generally serves about 6 people. What I do is I use a large Corningware or some kind of oven-proof baking dish. I like to use a glass one, and I preheat the oven to 350 degrees and put a little spread butter in the bottom of that. And the recipe calls for 4 tablespoonfuls of butter. Actually, what I do is I put the butter in the pan and put it in the oven and let it melt in there. And then when I take it out, I can let the butter cool and have it ready to put in my recipe. And then I've greased my pan all in one step. But after the pan is greased, then I spread the berries on the bottom of the pan. They've just been cleaned and rinsed. And we use 2 to 3 cups of berries. I don't put any sugar or anything on them because that's going to come within the batter itself. Then the batter part is really simple. I just put everything, including the cooled butter, the flour, sugar, cornstarch, salt, some eggs, some milk, and some almond extract and vanilla extract. And I put all of that in a blender. And I also like to use a little bit of something called Fiori di Sicilia. I order it online, but it is a vanilla that has a little bit of citrus flavor in it. And we think that adds a little zap. But then I blend everything and it gets to be a frothy mixture. And I pour that directly into the pan over top of the butter, over the top of the berries. And we bake it for 40 minutes and let it cool about 10 minutes. And the layers have formed for themselves, and it's not overly sweet, but it seems to be just sweet enough.
That I can't pronounce that. You order that from King Arthur?
I do. I order that from King Arthur Baking Company in Vermont.
And I can't pronounce what say that again.
Fiori di Sicilia, I believe is what it is.
I have to tell you, that has made a huge difference in the taste of her blackberry pies and cobblers. It really adds something punchy to it. It's noticeably superior with that ingredient. I think I just love what you do with that.
Interesting. Have you tried the clafouti with any other variety of berries?
Yes, we've done it with, of course, this one was with blackberries. We've done it with wine berries. We have a sour cherry tree in our yard, yes. So we've done it with cherries. And I actually think if you look at this as a traditional dessert, I believe it comes from France, and cherries are the traditional thing. I've done it with blueberries. I can't remember if I've done it with peaches, but I believe I have. Probably the only thing I haven't done it with that Bruce gathers around here is raspberries, because those are priced that when we have enough of those, he likes to save those for pies.
The wild black raspberry, there are 4 major rubus family members that we have in much of the country. It's the raspberry, the blackberry, the wineberry, and the dewberry. And the raspberry is my favorite. In a good year, we can gather a gallon, and it's going out multiple times to get as much as a gallon. And the raspberry pie is my favorite pie of any kind. And I'm sorry, I just hog the raspberry pies. They're just so sublime, especially with that ingredient that I have trouble pronouncing goes into it. The Fiori.
De Cecilia.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the raspberry pies are just beyond heavenly. Elaine, did you have anything else to add?
The only other thing I could think of is I think a lot of times if we're serving a clafouti as a dessert right before I serve it, and it's good chilled, but it's also good at room temperature, I will dust it with confectioner's sugar just because it makes it pretty. But that's more of an appearance addition than it is for taste.
Okay. So as far as the berries go specifically, do you cultivate any berries yourself, or do you rely solely on forage berries?
The big four, we don't cultivate them at all. They're all four of them will grow wild. But I will confess that in our fenced off garden, which we have, I guess, 6 foot tall wire fences around the entire garden, and 2 strands of solar powered electric wires to keep critters out. About 5 years ago, a volunteer wild raspberry plant popped up in our garden. And since then, they've spread across a good portion of the garden, and I've let them spread. So they're wild raspberries, but I'm cultivating them, so to speak. And the vast majority of that gallon or so of raspberries that we get every year comes from those wild ones that I've allowed to flourish inside our garden. We have 8 raised beds there as well, so there's plenty of room for some wild raspberry plants. But that's how highly I regard wild raspberries, that I've let them
Take up some space.
in my garden. They're just that special. And the blackberry, the wild native blackberry, is so widespread across the country. We try to gather 10 gallons of these big 4 summer wild berries every year. And I would say in any given year, the blackberry is going to be 5 to 6 gallons of that. They're just so abundant. And really across the range of these 4 wild berries, the blackberry is always, from my experience and where we've been, is always the most common. And it's just so adaptable to so many different habitats. And it's also a great colonizing plant. When ground is disturbed, blackberries are often in the seed bank, and they're among the first wild plants to come up. And this is a great native plant. We're glad to disturb earth on our 38 acres every few years here and there so that blackberry plants will colonize. And blackberry vines are a major source of nesting area and feeding area for songbirds as well. We've had wild turkeys lay eggs in our wild berry patches as well. And of course, numerous songbirds do the same. So it's these 4 summer berries are just superb for humans and wildlife and the forest itself.
Back to the greens. You mentioned the watercress that you gather year round. Would you say one of the larger sources of greens in your diet, or where does that land?
We gather it periodically. We have plenty of it, but
It seems like when we gather about 4 cups at a time. And I'm saying that because we have a little plastic 1-quart measuring cup that we'll put it in. And I would say anywhere from 2 to 4 cups each time we do it. But no, it's not the major source of greens in our diet. It's an accent.
Yeah, where it really serves a great purpose for us and for anybody is during the wintertime. This is a fresh winter vegetable, and it's that peppery flavor is really a special thing. It's of most valuable to us in the wintertime and in the early spring. And we've noticed that our plants tend to die back in the summertime anyway, which our wild watercress plants down in our 2 springs, they just die back some in the summertime every year. But then they come bouncing back during the cold weather period. It's just really a neat plant to be nutritious and so common in so many areas of the country in the wintertime.
Is there anything else you want to add?
Here's an interesting thing about the oysters. like all mushrooms, sometimes they're incredibly abundant and you seem to find them everywhere. And then the other times you just can't, for whatever reason, and you don't find them at all. Last year, for example, I found oyster mushrooms growing in mass on this one dead tree in West Virginia while my son and I were driving home from our West Virginia land that we own. And we gathered dozens and dozens of those oysters from that one tree. But the rest of the year we never saw another one. 2 years ago, we had one dead ash tree on our land that every few months was sending forth all these oysters. And then there was another land where I hunt that every time I went over there in the fall and the winter, this one particular dead oak would have oyster mushrooms on it that I would harvest. It's mushrooms are just a fickle fungi. They some years you can find them in abundance, and the next year you can't find them at all. Our favorite mushroom, absolute favorite mushroom, is the chicken of the woods. And we had an ash stump 30 feet right from our front stoop. 2 years ago, it produced every other month from May to the 1st of November. Then the year after that, it only produced one time. And then the year after that, which was last summer, it didn't produce at all. And that one little stump may be done as far as producing oyster mushrooms or any kind of mushroom. It's just a strange thing. You just never know from year to year.
You mentioned in there, Elaine, that you typically stir fry the oyster mushrooms before eating them. Is there any other way that you prepare them? Perhaps if you've ever dehydrated them, made mushroom powder or any other preserving?
I have not done that. I don't have a dehydrator, and I've borrowed one before. And I think because I'm not so familiar with it, I didn't trust that I had dehydrated the things I was doing well enough. So I ended up bagging them and freezing them as well, just to be sure that nothing molded or backfired on me. So really, no, that's the main thing I've done. I'm not sure. Bruce called it stir frying. I would just call it sauteing. I'll just cut them into the size pieces I think I'm going to want and saute them in a mix in either olive oil or maybe olive oil and butter, and then drain them. Sometimes I'll season them with some salt and garlic powder. Sometimes I don't. Then I'll drain them on paper towels and put them on a cookie sheet and pop them in the freezer in a single layer. And once they've frozen, then I can just bag them and bag them and keep them in the freezer until we want some. And then I'll pull out a handful or a cup or 2 cups, whatever we want to use that day. So that's what we do when we have some too many to excess. We've had other times where maybe I'm cooking something like a soup and I'll just drop whatever mushroom we have that we've just gathered and let the broth cook them.
I had something to add about the unpredictable nature of mushrooms. I have a story coming out in Grit on the puffball family of mushrooms. I believe it's coming out this fall. And for years, the choice puffball in much of America, and there's several species of giant puffballs. The giant puffball is the choice member of the puffball family. This mushroom looks like a soccer ball. And from a distance, it looks like a soccer ball has been left in the woods. I have searched for years for the giant puffball, and there's no misidentifying it from anything. I've never, ever found one. And then last year, in 1 week, I found 3. And one of those puffballs was at 3,200 feet on a mountain in West Virginia, growing under a wild grape arbor. And I brought that thing home. I tell you, I was turkey hunting when I was looking for it, but I stopped turkey hunting to harvest that. And then half hour later, I found another one on that same farm. Anyway, that one giant puffball, we are still using it for recipes. And we have in the Grit story that's coming out. I think you did I have a turkey and a venison recipe. I think both. I'd have to check on that. But you can slice it like a piece of bread and then put it right next to the meat and then the cheese. And it's wonderful stuff. Now, who knows how long? Maybe I'll find three in 1 week this fall. Who knows? Or I may go years without finding another one. It's just the nature of mushroom hunting.
For curiosity, what would you say the diameter of that was, roughly?
Think a soccer ball. I've read that there's been times when kids who found the giant puffball were kicking it around like a soccer ball.
That's great.
So a couple kicks though, and it would probably disintegrate. But it's too valuable to be played with that way. Golly, you got 3 or 4 bags of good sized bags of
Yes.
of,
Yeah.
of the giant puffball.
In that particular one, I started off doing sugar cube sized pieces, is maybe how I would describe small chunks. And I thought it quickly dawned on me that I was going to be there all night because,
It was so
I could
big.
only cook so many in the pan at a time. And then I started thinking about doing slices, and we've really enjoyed the big slices. The slices are about the size of the palm of your hand and probably a half an inch thick. So they really do lend themselves nicely to sandwiches. And then if you wanted it on a salad, you could just slice it up.
Get some sourdough bread, some sort of venison cut or whatever you want, beef, pork, chicken, whatever cut you want. But she made one dish with tenderloin, sharp cheddar cheese, and a slice of giant puffball, and with spinach from our garden. Whoa, what a taste sensation that was. And we've eaten all the slices. I have to admit that I pigged out on those. But we've got the cut up parts. We got 2 more bags of those that we're going to be using for quite a while. And there's a close relative of the giant puffball called the skull puffball. And it looks like a human brain was planted in your yard. And there's no confusing that with anything else. There's no lookalikes to that I can think of. And that one's they're just as good as the giant puffball. And then there's these tiny little puffballs that are 2 inches long, the common puffball, and they all spit those spores out of their tops. But once those spores start to form, they're no longer edible. So you can't eat them when their spores have formed.
As far as preserving, again, back to the black walnut, have you ever had any of them spoil? And if not, how long would you say that once they're dried out, they would last?
Oh, they'll keep easily a year. We've never kept them that longer than that because we use them.
We've
Right.
never had a problem in the freezer with them. We have had a time where we the husk was off. It was still in the nut. We hadn't cracked the nut and picked out the nut meats. And we waited too long, and some of those molded before we got to them. I don't recall what the weather was at that time. I just remember that happening.
When we put them on our hearth, our wood stove hearth, for them to dry, but we don't use the wood stove in September and early October when we gather the walnuts, but that's where we put them to dry. And then you want them to season for a while when they're out of those husks, but then you want to go ahead and crack them so that nut meat doesn't, as Elaine says, dry out. We've got some black walnut in our freezer right now that we need to make some persimmon bread and some black walnut persimmon bread. By the way, we have a story coming out on Grit on that as well. And we have a Mother Earth News piece coming out this fall that has a persimmon recipe. That is a fantastic fruit. The persimmon is our favorite fall fruit by far.
Yeah, there were a couple of trees near where I lived for a bit in Kentucky growing up, and they're just delicious. How would you describe the flavor of a persimmon for someone who's never had one?
Wow. Elaine?
That's good. It's both sweet and tart at the same time if you get it when it's truly ripe, and not what happens a lot of times as we all grow up where somebody tries to entice you to eat an unripe persimmon and it turns your mouth You feel like your mouth is turning inside out.
Yeah, you eat
I've
one,
been the victim of that.
you'll be spitting cotton. That's what I call it. But we gather from several wild trees, and usually around the third week in November, this is Southwest Virginia, the persimmon is ripe. But sometimes that third week, they're not quite ripe. Correct, Elaine?
You said third week of what month?
November.
Yeah, I would say by then usually they're ripe. What we find here is if they're still pretty, when you look at them on the tree, you can just about know they're not ripe. They almost need to start looking a little blackened and
Mushy.
and then they're really good.
The taste is,
I'm not sure how to describe the taste except saying that yes, it's sweet, but there's a tartness to it also.
the bread, the inside of the bread has this brownish orange hue to it, and that just adds to it. And the black walnuts, wild black walnuts especially, tight really, after it sets a while, that flavor seems to infuse and intensify. You would agree with that too, wouldn't you?
Yeah. They have a very strong aroma, not aroma.
It's pleasant and strong. Yeah.
My recollection is the consistency is that of like a pumpkin almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, and the paw has a similar bite, I would say. A little acidic.
Yes, but pawpaws to me lend themselves more towards almost a banana or a mango or something like that. And not just in appearance, but a little bit in that taste. But a persimmon, I can't quite.
It's almost like an umami. Like it is a richer, almost a savory angle to it. Like it's similar to a pumpkin in some. It's not quite as sweet, like a sweet potato.
We have a paw patch 30, 40 yards from where we're sitting, down in the hollow right below our house. And our daughter, Josh, kept asking when they were going to ripen. Our daughter, she got in there and gathered all the pawpaws this year. And she took our grandsons in there. And I did not mind one bit. I was glad that she's a forager too. But that they are a treat as well. But still, the persimmon, there's nothing close to the persimmon. The pawpaws are wonderful, but nothing close in the fall as far as fruits go to the persimmon.
Yeah, just to give it a regional difference, I was just checking. We have a persimmon tree not far from a lake where I live, and ours was ready to harvest in late September.
And where do you live, Josh?
Topeka, Kansas. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. It was in September. Wow. Okay.
Yep.
All ripenings are local.
Yeah, and it might have been last year. Last year was especially wet for whatever, if that makes any difference. So, for what it's worth. But I'm going to bring in real quick, put her on the spot, see if she has any questions. It's Alyssa Warner, our other producer here.
I was going to say I tried your berry clafouti as soon as I did the group read with store-bought berries, but it was delicious.
Good.
It's fantastic. I just did the group read and I clocked out for lunch and I said, Caleb, I need to go to the store right
It's so easy.
It's so easy. And I didn't have, because I have seen on King Arthur, I'm a big fan of King Arthur baking. Yes. I've seen that vanilla before, but I didn't have any on hand. But I used orange blossom extract.
Yes.
And I added that to my vanilla extract, and it was quite good.
Good.
That's something you can try. Thanks for the tip. We're going to try that.
Big fan of my husband is he grew up in Europe. So whenever we go to the European stores, there's this aisle of rose water and orange blossom water and all these different extract waters. It's my happy place. Anyway, I was thinking about, it's been a while since I've read your article. I saw it before it went to print. I was wondering, when you're talking about domesticating a wild berry.
That's what I did. Yeah.
Just like the barn cats, we welcome them into our spaces and they give to us, we give to them. I was thinking about domesticating a wild blackberry that's out behind the office and bringing it home. But folks have told me they get a little wild when they grow. Sometimes they're a little bit hard to corral. Do you have to do a lot of maintenance on your wild raspberry?
The blackberry is more aggressive in its spreading than a raspberry is. And the blackberry is the dominant one of the 4 summer rubus family members that grow in this country. And at least it is. And the area where we do most of our foraging is in Virginia and West Virginia, because we live near the state line of both states and own land in both states. So I can't go much beyond there as far as personal experience. But the blackberry just outcompetes the other 3, which is, there's nothing bad or good about that. The raspberry, there's probably 15 different vines, and we have 8 raised beds, I think, in the garden, and they're all coexisting quite well. And I've had to trim them back a little bit from around 2 of our raised beds, but that's okay too. We also have a sour cherry tree that's in there, and so everything seems to be coexisting quite well.
We love to hear that. Have you ever domesticated any other wild edibles before?
In our garden, we have dandelions, broadleaf plantain, chickweed, and they pop up in there and in between our raised beds, and I don't pull them out. Just last week, in fact, Elaine, we have 13 heritage Rhode Island red hens, and 12 of the 13 are pullets, and they're producing eggs in huge numbers. Some days we get 11. I think that's the best day we've had so far. So we're having all kinds of eggs. One day for dinner we wanted an egg dish this month, and so I went into the garden, and there was wild dandelions, wild bittercress growing in the garden, and some spinach that had left over from that had overwintered, and there were wild onions around too. So we had a really nice egg dish with plants from our garden that included dandelions and bittercress. And the spaces between our raised beds, we have these wild edible flora pop up, and we just let them go to town and eat them just like our other vegetables. Now, if you put chemicals in your lawn, you can't do that. But we don't put chemicals in our lawn, and for sure we don't have chemicals in our garden. Take advantage of those plants that pop up. The native wild onion is also very common in our yard this time of year. And by this time of year, I mean from January through April. And you can eat the stems and the onions in any way you'd normally eat any other onion, any domestic onion.
I like this idea that you're touching on very much, where you folks do garden, you do raise your own chickens and your own eggs, but you also really rely on just what's growing in between your beds, especially in the spring when it's tough to get domesticated plants to grow yourself. The first dandelions are a treat for us at my house.
The dandelion is a great winter, early spring vegetable.
It is. And Nikki Shatter, in one of her garden planning webinars, she talks about permaculture. She says it's a great plant in your garden to leave because the taproot reaches so down that it pulls up a lot of nutrients.
I would agree. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And one last question for you. Speaking of puffball mushrooms, the puffball mushroom, I have seen a very viral puffball mushroom pizza crust. Have y'all tried that yet?
No, I don't know no, I know nothing about this.
So they take your puffball mushroom, your big old mushroom, and you cut it into large slices, and then you put that on like a cast iron pan or something real hot, and you sear it so that it releases all of its water and it's not mushy, and then you build your pizza on that.
Okay, you could use the great puffball slices for that. Yes, I can see that.
I can see that.
It looks, I've never seen one, but they looked so good. And people were making them all summer last year.
It sounds like it would be good.
The giant puffball, again, every area is different, but I found them last fall, and October was the month. But they also grow in July and August, and the skull puffballs were also in October. Now, The pear-shaped puffball, we found those in December, in late fall, early winter. Now, and then the pear-shaped puffball is the one about an inch tall, and those are classic October, November puffballs. But other puffballs, of course, are June, July. It's a big family of edibles. In the grid article, I think I covered 6 different puffball species. And the tiniest ones are the Curtis's puffballs, and they're just the size of your thumbnail. So they're really little.
I wanted to just ask one last question before we go today. So, talking about foraging in general, are there any guidelines that you follow as far as how much to forage, where to forage, and your ethos around those topics?
You don't want to pick everything that you find. You want to leave it for somebody else and for wildlife. I think that's part of it. And one of the things I was told to do by veteran mushroom foragers was to bring a mesh bag so that the spores would spread as you gather them. And Elaine bought me a mesh bag for that purpose.
To mention, that same friend does a lot of his foraging on public land, and he has referred several times to knowing what the rules were for that particular public land. And I felt like he would say there was maybe a pound or 2 pounds of mushrooms that were permissible on these particular designated areas to gather in a day. But I think if it's public land, you have to know what the rules are
Yes,
for
that's a
that
good point.
particular area. But since we live in the woods and have access to woods, that isn't our issue. It's just making sure that there's something left to regrow.
Yeah, last year, 2 years ago, we had oyster mushrooms growing, and I found them on a Tuesday, I guess, or whatever. And I thought I'd let them grow a little bit more and pick them on Wednesday. But then when I came back on Wednesday, they had bugged out. The bugs had found them. And so I should have gathered them right then, and all of them. But and that's one of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, you were talking earlier about when you found that, was it the giant puffball that you found while you were
Yes.
turkey hunting? Yeah, so was that your land? I think you had mentioned it was someone else's farm.
No, I was on a West Virginia farm that's 75 miles from our house, and the landowner has let me hunt there for about 15 or so years. And his particular farm is a mushroom haven in the spring and the fall when I'm up there. And he just, for whatever reason, that farm has interesting numbers of wild mushrooms. I've gathered morels and ramps up there, for example, in the spring, and also in the spring, dryad saddles. And I think the article I have in Grit that's going to be out in May, June, I think Elaine did some dryad saddle spring recipes with that mushroom. Some farms seem to have them and some places don't. Our 38 acres here in Botetourt, and we've lived here since '89, we've only found during all those years one morel mushroom on it. One. And for whatever reason, they just don't grow here. So
maybe next time you find some somewhere, you just put it in that mesh bag and go for a hike around your land. Right? Yeah.
And I've checked that one place I found that morel on our land that was about 4 years ago. And I've checked that spot every year, every spring since, and it's no go.
Sure. Mentioning that farm you've hunted on for all those years, it just makes me think of anytime even if it's just taking a walk through a friend's land or hunting or whatever reason, certainly worth asking them in advance how they feel about you doing some foraging.
Yes,
because
you should always do that.
You never know.
And yeah, for example, one farmer here last year, my grandsons and I went over there to pick blackberries, and we gathered a couple quarts. And then I called to let him know and that we'd gathered some, and I was going to bring him a jar of blackberry jam.
That's great.
And that's what you should do. He allows us to forage, and he deserves a gift for that, giving us that privilege. and he was pleased with his blackberry jam, and who knows, maybe the blackberry pie that we're going to eat later today came from his land. Maybe that was one of the quarts we got that particular time. So it works out well for everybody. But you should always respect the landowner and give them a gift of your bounty.
Absolutely. I can't think of a better way to go out than thinking about that pie that's in your future. So appreciate your time and look forward to chatting with you again sometime soon.
Yeah, anytime you want us. We love spreading the word about wild edibles.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Mother Earth News and Friends. To listen to more podcasts and get connected on our social media, visit www.motherearthnews.com/podcast. You can also email us at podcast@ogdenpubs.com with any questions or suggestions. Our podcast production team includes Kenny Coogan, Alyssa Warner, and myself, Josh Wilder. Music for this episode is the song Hustle by Kevin MacLeod. The Mother Earth News and Friends podcast is a production of Ogden Publications.
Until next time, don't forget to love your mother.